All right, so let's begin eating this elephant one bite at a time. And this is the evidence elephant that we're talking about and referring to both at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry and the Ad Hoc Committee. So we'll be straddling these two events unfolding yesterday and make some sense of how they're tied, but how they also take us closer into the inner workings of not only the Independent Directorate Against Corruption, but the goings-on in the Ekurhuleni Metro Police Department and how it all plays into this bigger scheme that we are hearing has been at play for a few years now. So Eldred De Klerk, as always, joins me to look at these two events and some of the evidence that unfolded there. Eldred, good morning, as always. Lovely to have you on the program. I want to kick off with the testimony we heard at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry yesterday. And that's from the suspended EMPD head. Now, this is the big chief there in Ekurhuleni in the Metro Police Department. This is Isaac Mapiyeye, who we know is already facing his own personal struggles around allegations of sexual misconduct. But he's outlining the story of how this MOU, or at least two MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, between two of Cat Matlala's companies and the EMPD came about. And he's pointing the finger at someone in his own department. This is Brigadier Julius Mkhwanazi, of signing these MOUs without anyone knowing, basically, going off book and doing this without the authority. We know that Mkhwanazi is now on suspension himself. What did you make of his testimony? Because I was saying to our viewers earlier this morning that we all were quite upset about it. How does somebody who's a civilian get access to blue lights and getting their vehicles kitted out at public expense?
Absolutely. And the Metro Chief was at pains to say to us that it seems that Julius seemed to enjoy the support of other heads of department within the Metro Police. So this seems to be an act of collusion where they got together and put in place a process while the chief was on leave. And they benefited from this process, both in terms of relationships, but also, it is said, in terms of gifts for the Metro Police Department. Now, that's not just irregular. The timing of it is very suspicious. And the action should not just be taken against the brigadier who was acting at the time, but also the other heads of department should surely be investigated because they're undermining the authority of the chief of police of the Metro.
You know what's interesting is I want to go back to Dumisani Khumalo. This is the head of crime intelligence testimony earlier in the week preceding Mapiyeye's testimony. And he was in relating this relationship, this toxic relationship, I can say, based on his description between him and the DNC, the Deputy National Police Commissioner. This is Lieutenant General Shadrach Sibia. This breakdown in their relationship. So they had this ongoing feud that was going on between the two of them. Now, these are crime intelligence and policing's two most senior officials, paralyzing investigations, weakening national intelligence coordination. How does the theme that he was relating feed into this kind of breakdown in the lines of authority? Is there a connection?
Well, there definitely is, because we're talking about the same characters, Iman. And one of the questions that was put to, we'll talk about her testimony later, the head of IDAC, was the question that we probably all are asking ourselves: do you know the following individuals? Cat with a C, Cat with a K, and Brown Mkhotsi. So there seems to be not just characters linking the various institutions and the various individuals being accused of corruption. So their influence is insidious. And that is part of and that's the more obvious link. The other link is the fact that they targeted policing institutions, law enforcement institutions, and was both granted tenders within that law enforcement institution. So it also speaks to the nature of the institution and the vulnerabilities and weakness of our law enforcement institutions. Critically, though, Iman, it also says something about the type of leadership that we have, because overall, the person responsible is the DG of the South African Police Service, that's the National Commissioner. Today, it is General Fani Masamula. It could have been, there were other DGs and other national commissioners whose leadership was also called into question, because he has ultimately oversight over both the Metro Police, over its systems and operations, over its training and resourcing, and he has oversight over the divisions that he has himself created. Because those divisions have to be created by a structure by the National Commissioner, and the person ultimately responsible, who's the executive officer and the accounting officer, is the National Commissioner.
Which brings me to the question, what does it say, Eldred, about his authority? This has all been about power. It's been about the abuse of power, is the story that we're hearing as South Africans, of people who are financially connected, bringing their power to bear, being able to keep their foot on the neck, allegedly, on people who can facilitate either sweet deals or privileges for them. But we're not hearing the name of Fani Masamula come up as much. And while that might be a good thing in terms of determining whether his hands have been clean throughout this process, it also gives us an idea of who the key players have been in terms of exerting that power, because we hear a lot about Lieutenant General Shadrack Sibiya, who is his deputy.
Absolutely. But if you look at the structure, he also seems to sit alongside, slightly off to the side of the National Commissioner, because he heads up a creation in the form of DPCI that we have always revered, and we always thought that this would be the corruption-busting, serious crime-fighting entity. So they are have a ring-fence budget, and they have to do things by themselves, even though they must account ultimately to the National Commissioner. So at best, we can say that the National Commissioner was asleep at the wheel, and we hope that that's all it is, and that he trusted his divisional heads and his provincial commissioners to get on with the job and draw on him should they need his support. That is the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that some may say that he allowed this to happen on his watch. And either way, the impact of it is what brought us here today, Iman.
I want to go to Andrea Johnson's testimony in just a moment, but it behoves me to ask you, I mean, if this was a performance review based on what we know so far of Fani Masamola's leadership and his own influence and authority, what would you say? Well,
unfortunately, he's been under the cusp, so to speak, for a while. He didn't have he's alleged not to have had the proper security clearance. His audits were not done. So it took a while for him to get into office. And I was one of the people who was happy that he got the office, because he's somebody who still has an exemplary record, and somebody who was soft-spoken, but it seemed at that time, and my judgment still is, that he was decisive. Is the culture of the police so that even somebody who was well-intentioned, quite decisive, that even his or her leadership could systematically be undermined, and that there could be this kind of cover-up and collusion to actually minimize the impact and the oversight ability of a national commissioner? We have a lot to still listen to, and we have a lot to still learn, Iman. But he's not coming out well at this time.
Yeah, the jury seems to be out on that. The jury also seems to be out on Andrea Johnson as well as the head of IDAC. This is the Independent Directorate Against Corruption. We know it was specially set up for, the purpose of prosecuting corruption cases. Right at the very beginning, there were some theories around the timing of Dumisani Khumalo's arrest as head of the PKTT, head of crime intelligence, that he was essentially, his arrest was aimed at neutralizing him. This happened in May, June of this year, just a couple of months ago. We know that he's in the dock. And Andrea Johnson saying, hey, listen, everything was completely above board. These arrests were conducted in a very careful way. They were carefully investigated. They were authorized. They are legitimate. That DK was, sorry, we're using these acronyms now, but Dumisani Khumalo was notified in advance. His security detail was also with him and accompanied him. So these arrests are legitimate, but that he broke protocol in the appointment, amongst other things, of Brigadier Dineo Mukwele in a strategic role that demanded experience. Of course, she came under personal attack as well in Parliament yesterday. Her husband is at crime intelligence, and he's not friends with Dumisani Khumalo, is the narration that we are being given and understand. Mkhwanazi, let me bring him back in and why this is so important and connected. Mkhwanazi said that, he was being used as, talking about Brian Padiachi, who was being used as an enabler and a pawn. She was saying, well, this is a qualified individual who's been at IDAC since 2021. So there's no political interference. All these investigations are independent. What did you make of her testimony yesterday?
Well, it's unfortunate that she is not the only individual where your spouse or your significant other is working in the same institution. She has no direct oversight over him. He's not in her line function. And there is not much that he can do. She's the head of a department that sits within the justice cluster, or the judiciary rather than the South African Police Service. The other thing about her testimony is that she was at pains to say that she was somebody who subjects herself to checks and balances, that everything she does, she ensures that she follows the law, follows the procedures, and makes sure that she gets signs off of things, and that she works together with her two chiefs to ensure that what they do can withstand scrutiny. Because she is basically saying that no one's above the law, and that she will subject herself to those checks and balances that she holds in the nature of her investigations. And she says that, and we got to take her by your word, because these are simply just allegations put without evidence that there's a mutually beneficial relationship or between herself and her husband, and that they're sharing information that should not be shared. Those are allegations. It was never backed up. And she's now been put in a position where she simply has to refute it. And we have to take it at that until somebody can say, this is the information that you shared, and this is how it impacted particular investigations.
We'll leave it there. Eldred De Klerk, thank you as always for helping us make sense of how things are connected and important. As she said yesterday, famously now, pillow talk gets you killed. That is definitely something she says she did not engage in. 7:30, exactly time for a relook at our headlines at this hour.